Have you ever wondered what these Exile soldiers do all day? Me neither, but I have wondered how they fight, so why don't we find out? I'm Bitesized Otaku, and in this video, I'll be recreating the Exile soldiers and seeing how their build competes in the lands between against players in the arena and bosses. But, like the video and give it to me bite-sized. So the Exile soldiers were the Exile set, which will give us strong defense against physical, slashing and piercing, but slightly weaker against other threats and 40 poise, alongside using a variety of weapons. We have the Crescent Moon Axe, which is a fantastic weapon boasting brilliant damage and a brilliant moveset, and this is usually two-handed by the Exile soldiers. They don't use the weapon art, so I've kept it vanilla with Warcry, and this will boost our damage by 7.5% and our strength scaling by +5, alongside changing our heavy attacks animation. Then let's turn to our longsword, which they can use in combination with Stormblade, and this weapon deals low amounts of damage, but the skill can deal great damage at a distance and even more close up, allowing you to punish ranged opponents. Then there's the spear, which they also don't use the weapon art on, but I've opted to keep the vanilla impaling thrust that comes with the weapon, and this is a decent spear which can complement other weapons, but is only used by the Exile soldiers in Castle Sol. They also used an interesting weapon called a torch pole, which, yeah, is pretty self-explanatory, and this deals fire damage and comes with the weapon art charged forth, but can't be infused, with all of the infusible weapons in our collection having a quality infusion, so we can benefit from our strength and dexterity. In addition, they also use two kinds of shields, being the marred leather or wooden shield, but I've opted for the wooden variety simply because it has better stats and both do bleed build up, so there's no point in using both. And lastly, they wield the knight's crossbow and use fire bombs, which have limited utility, but we'll include these just to be authentic. And as for our stats, I've opted for a quality distribution that will allow us to meet the stat requirements for all of our equipment while squeezing out some damage. And if we turn to some action, we can see that our spear and shield will provide us with a medium ranged option for damage, but a moveset that's somewhat serviceable due to our angled strikes. But this weapon's skill Impaling Thrust is a lifesaver, as it can quickly close the gap and deal high amounts of damage to enemies. The shield with Shield Bash is brilliant for trading attacks by blocking damage and retaliating with our own, and this can also passively build up bleed. This setup has a weakness being that we don't have many options, and we are prone to stagger, meaning that we must damage our opponents before they damage us. A similar thing could be said for the sword and shield combination, except for the fact that Stormblade is a ranged option that can deal great damage at a distance, and even more at point blank, but our sword suffers from range and damage issues with not much else to fall back on. Moving on to our torch pole, this weapon is usually two-handed by the Exile soldiers and acts as a longer version of our spear with fire, and this extra distance makes a world of difference, as you can often catch enemies outside of their own weapon range, trading blows for physical and fire damage. The skill charged forth can be useful in rare circumstances, but is easily punished by anyone who's seen it before, due to the skill leaving us vulnerable when exposed to backstabs or strikes. The Crescent Moon Axe is probably the best weapon in our arsenal due to its damage, brilliant hyper armor and moveset, but its skill Warcry doesn't add much value and actually makes our heavy attacks somewhat inferior to the original version, despite the damage boost. And lastly, our knight's crossbow is somewhat useless due to the fact that it fires slowly, takes a long time to reload, and does a small amount of damage, unless you like trolling your opponent with a nicely timed bolt to finish them off. On the PvE angle, all of our weapons will be useful for dealing with bosses, but you may find yourself just using the Crescent Moon Axe, which deals the highest damage output in combination with the sword, as Stormblade outclasses all of our other weapon arts. The torch pole will hit bosses with nice range, and is a nice option for fire damage, while the crossbow can be useful for finishing off that last level of health, but is unlikely to be useful later in the game. Shield Bash is also useful for blocking and retaliating against bosses, but it might just be better to dodge. Then on our weaknesses, we'll need some talismans and hopefully some stronger gear, so we can up our defense and poise to a reasonable level, avoid getting staggered so easily, and have less weapons to shuffle through. So let's make some adjustments. To start, let's swap out our gauntlets for the veterans gauntlets and our greaves for the banished knights, so we can get a poise and defense boost without destroying our overall style. Next, I'm going to reduce the overall number of weapons that we're using, as we've got too many, and most of them are easily replaced without too much difference. But two that I will keep will be the Crescent Moon Axe and the Torch Pole, which will provide us with a long range poke to damage enemies from a safe distance. Let's equip the Crescent Moon Axe with Storm Stomp, which will allow us 3 strikes on enemies when stunned, and if you're missing the longsword or any other weapon type previously used, feel free to use any steel weapon with a storm related Ash of War that suits this build's theme perfectly. I've also decided to swap out the Soldier's Crossbow for the Poly Crossbow that suits this build style perfectly with its red design and pairs well with exploding bolts, in which it will fire 3 at the same time, allowing us to get a bigger burst of damage over a larger area. The marred wooden shield can stay as it is, minus the cold infusion, as it's perfect for trading blows if enemies have low health, but you could equip Storm Wall for a Storm Fiend parrying option. And while keeping our stats the same, we can use the Shard of Alexander, Bull Goat's Talisman, Erdtree Favor +2, and the Carian Philly Creed Crest for our talismans, and a combination of greases and fan daggers to spice up our combat options. And this provides us with far better results, allowing the Great Axe to dish out damage against almost any setup, and the Torch Pole to give us some quicker range thrusts. The Pulley Crossbow can deal some small damage, useful for punishing enemies or finishing off low health opponents, and combined with the shield, there shouldn't be any problem with ending fights. But in conclusion, you can definitely pull off a convincing Exile Soldier cosplay that's obtainable early game with a bit of patience when farming. Most weapons can be swapped out due to how basic they are, but the Crescent Moon Axe and Torch Pole are a combination worth keeping alongside the shield and Pulley Crossbow that suits the build's theme perfectly. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and of course subscribe. This is Bitesized Otaku, and I hope you enjoyed.